Good afternoon. My name is Agmata, and I am the Senior Communications Manager here at Verdant Technologies. I will be presenting an emission strategy report that will hopefully set us up for a future sustainability initiative. Next slide. For our table of contents today, we'll be giving a brief overview of the report. This is where we're going to outline what the problem is and two initiatives that we have proposed to solve this problem. Next, we'll be looking at the two initiatives that were proposed in more depth. We'll be looking at how they will be implemented, any cost considerations, their benefits and risks, and we'll give a timeline of what it will look like if these initiatives were to be implemented. Next, after that, is a comparative analysis between the two, where we will be weighing out the pros and cons that will finally lead us to the recommendation. Next slide. For the overview, as it stands, Verdant currently lacks a formal emission strategy, and as a tech company, electricity is a major source of our operational carbon footprint. So the two ideas that we propose to solve this issue is carbon neutrality and switching over to 100% renewable energy. Now, these evaluations are focused on cost, implementation feasibility, and overall environmental impact. Next slide. Here shows a graph of our current positions next to our industry leaders, our peer average, and the regulatory target for tech firms' environmental commitment benchmark for 2025. And as you can see, it shows that Verdant lacks a formal emissions reduction plan. There are currently no offsetting or formal Scope 1 and 2 emissions tracking, and also that our competitors are adopting more aggressive ESG goals, ESG meaning environmental, social, and governance. And since we are under the regulatory target for this year, we are facing a growing reputational and stakeholder pressure to adopt a more sustainable operation plan. For our scope and objectives, we'll be looking at Scope 1, which are our direct emissions. These are emissions that are under our direct control. Scope 2 is our purchased electricity, and for Scope 3, which is supply chain, we decided to exclude it because of current limitations and measurement complexity for our supply chain emissions. Now, the goal for today is to identify a structured and measurable emissions reduction strategy that are focused on reducing or possibly eliminating Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions. For our evaluation criteria for this approach will depend on cost, implementation feasibility, and again, environmental impact. Initiative 1. Next slide. Initiative 1. Carbon neutrality. So this strategy basically combines reducing internal emissions and then purchasing offsets to cover for the rest of the emissions. So these offsets typically include reforestation, clean energy investments, and methane capture programs. Now this approach is very flexible as it covers both scopes. However, because we are purchasing offsets from a third party, the credibility of said third party is what is depended on for the quality of this initiative. Next slide. For the implementation and budget of this first initiative, so the implementation will require us to do a full Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions audit. And since we are trying to reduce our internal emissions, we will need to do some upgrades on our infrastructure. This includes our HVAC efficiency, smart thermostats, and possibly switching our company vehicles from what they are right now to electric or hybrid models. It will also require us to integrate AI tools to track and forecast our emissions, and launch engagement and supplier awareness campaigns. Regarding our offsets, we will need to purchase certified carbon offsets to cover for the remainder of the emissions that we use up. So for the budget and costs, this is a big project, so it will require us to invest in between 160 to 415,000, but this includes our emissions audits, all of the upgrades, training, and the AI systems that will be put into our infrastructure. Now, this also requires ongoing annual costs, which will cost about 25 to 75K, and this will be our offset purchases and the maintenance for our systems. Next slide. For the benefits and risks, again, this is very flexible and it's scalable, that addresses both scopes. It is also going to heavily boost our ESG profiles, which will put us above the regulatory target and possibly next to the industry leaders. And for the risks is, again, the offset credibility. It's heavily dependent on the credibility of the third party that we purchase our offsets from. Another one is the risk of greenwashing, which is basically when a company says they have environmental initiatives but are not backing it up with action. And lastly, offset prices may rise over time. This also requires a strong oversight and tracking. Next slide. So this next slide shows us a timeline of the 1 to 3 years to full implementation of this initiative. So we have the first 3 months or 0 to 3 months of initial setup, and then our internal upgrades and our offset integration. You can look at the steps that are within this timeline. And for initiative 2, next slide, we have the 100% renewable energy. Now this strategy is basically telling us to purchase electricity from clean energy providers via contracts or certificates. And these certificates and contracts include PPAs, which are power purchase agreements, and energy attribute certificates, EACs. So basically, this eliminates our Scope 2 emissions, but our Scope 2 emissions only. It only affects our Scope 2 emissions. Now, the upside to this is that it requires no infrastructure changes, and both PPAs and EACs are highly credible and traceable. Next slide. For the implementation and budget, it's relatively shorter. We just need to sign multi-year PPA or EAC contracts from credible sources, maintain the existing grid connection, and use a blended approach consisting of solar energy storage and grid backup. So for costs, it's a simpler approach. So it would only cost us about 25 to 60K for the first year. This would include our contract negotiation and our legal review, and our ongoing costs would look about 10K to 25K per year. And these would be our annual payments to the EAC and PPAs. For the benefits and risks, which is on the next slide, again, it only eliminates Scope 2. That's a risk, but that could also be a benefit because it eliminates all Scope 2 or eliminates Scope 2 emissions. Another benefit is the fast implementation. We just need to sign contracts from credible sources. Again, another one is that it is highly credible and traceable, and it also has stable long-term energy costs and minimal operational disruption. Another risk to this is, aside from it being limited to Scope 2, is that we need to heavily check the EAC verification quality, as they may vary, and it also requires contract expertise. The last risk is that future demand growth for such initiative may rise, which will affect supply and prices. On the next slide is a timeline for this. We project it to only take 6 to 1 year for full implementation, with the initial setup, the contracting phase, and of course the execution. Next slide. So for this slide, we have a table showing us a comparison between the two, with that's going to be based on scope coverage. So for carbon neutrality, it's Scope 1 and 2, and for renewable energy, it's only 2. Transparency depends on offset quality for carbon neutrality, while it depends on certified and traceable PPAs and EACs for renewable energy. The cost profile, again, is much higher for carbon neutrality and may vary along the years. since it's such a big project. But for renewable energy, it's lower and more stable over time. For implementation, um, carbon neutrality is much more complex. Uh, Timeline, carbon neutrality is longer, but again, it's a much bigger and more ambitious project with both covering both scope 1 and scope 2. And for renewable energy, only it being only limited to scope 2 can be implemented within 6 to 1 year. Now, for the risks and environmental impact, greenwashing and resistance and tracking complexity are for carbon neutrality and for the environmental impact. It reduces total emissions with some reliance on third-party projects. Next slide, final considerations. So we've already gone through all of this, but just to reiterate, for credibility and stakeholder perception, stakeholders prefer visible, measurable action. So they would probably prefer something a lot more credible and trackable. So they would probably prefer the renewable energy approach for scope and emissions coverage. This depends on if you want speed of implementation or the amount of scope that it covers. So if you want something that covers both scopes, I would go with the carbon neutrality. But if you want a fast, speedy approach, then renewable energy is the go. Cost complexity and implementation, again, carbon neutrality is much more complex. It's also much more expensive, and the implementation goes to renewable energy at being so simple. Right. Next slide. Recommendation. So, considering all these facts, I definitely would go with starting on the 100% renewable energy strategy, as it sets us up for any future, aside from all of the benefits and risks that we've weighed out, it also sets us up for growth, which is on the bottom right of this slide. Again, yeah, it sets us up for growth. It completely eliminates scope 2 emissions. And if we want to also reduce our scope 1 emissions, we could pair it up with a specific scope 1 initiative which we can do way in the future. Or if we eventually want to go the carbon neutrality route, we could also go with this 100% renewables energy strategy as a foundation for such initiative. So again, if you have any questions or comments, this concludes my presentation. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to ask me at my email that's on the slide, austin.agmata@verdant.com. On the next slide is also the resources for all the research that I've done for this presentation. Thank you for listening.